Hello and welcome to Psyched, the show where we explore psychedelics through social, economic, and political perspectives.
To introduce our next speaker. This is Adam Knowles. Adam is an existential psychotherapist researching Amazonian plant medicine, ayahuasca, and its potential to help those in the UK with insight and well-being. Welcome, Adam, to Psych 2020.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
Hi, let me just start my video. Can you see me okay?
Yes, we can see you.
All right, great. Shall I get started?
That'd be great.
Lovely. Thanks for the introduction. Great to be here. Very grateful to Jerry and Julie for their work. I wish I could have seen more of that. Hopefully I'll catch up on that in the recording. Obviously there's a bit of a time difference. I've been seeing clients this morning. I'm in London here in the UK. Meeting in a bit of a strange time of social upheaval. I don't know how the lockdown there is affecting you guys. The protests, the riots, the various things going on. Just want to acknowledge that kind of I don't know, almost revolutionary feeling in the air. It's not what I'm going to talk about, but I want to obviously try and give you some substantial thinking and information about my ayahuasca research. But clearly something is going on. It's great that there are more conferences like this. I hope that and I get the sense that they include a number of different perspectives from different ethnicities and races and genders and sexualities and abilities and backgrounds, ages, all the different dimensions of identity, I suppose you could say. I think I want the psychedelic movement to be an inclusive movement. It's certainly something I care about, and that needs to translate to research participants and ethics in all sorts of ways. So my name's Adam Knowles. I'm an existential psychotherapist. So I've been seeing clients early. I'll see clients after this. There's just a little break in the middle where I do my other bit, which is myself as ayahuasca researcher. I'm just going to set my timer because I know we want to keep to time today and give myself 18 minutes or so. And then take questions. If you've got any questions, please submit them via the chat as you think of them, perhaps, and I'll try and come to those in 5 minutes at the end. The talk that you just saw was on psilocybin, different people say it different ways. Mine is on ayahuasca. It's still psychedelics, and it's still psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. I think there are different ways of doing that. Clearly back in the 60s, there was LSD assisted psychotherapy. The kind of Timothy Leary things happened, and then there was a crackdown, a politically motivated crackdown, it seems to me, which brought about a stop on the research for many decades, and which now resumed obviously in America and in the UK and Brazil, particularly for ayahuasca, amongst other places, the Netherlands, etc. And there's a huge, there's a global movement now of high, what's the word, quality research now resuming, and ayahuasca is part of that. Part of that is quantitative research, part of that is qualitative research. And I'm on the qualitative side, although I've spent my morning and just now reading neuroscience papers. I think that what Jerry and Julie were talking about, the mystical experience is sort of on my side of the fence. If there's a fence, there's not really a fence. There's no real divisions between anything really. What do they call the largest frame? You could say that. But we have to try and separate things so that we can analyze them. And I think that's part of my view, that, you know, words separate, concepts separate, but they're worthwhile to separate, to make one into two so that it can look at itself. And part of that is about qualitative and quantitative research. And that is a split between the kind of, I guess, sort of Western scientific view and the views of experience, researching experience. Clearly, I think Jerry and Julie are researching experience. They're working in psychotherapy, the guided visualization. I remember Jung talked about sitting in his memories, dreams, and reflections, talked about sitting on a rock and not being sure whether it was Jung sitting on a rock or he was the rock that Jung was sitting on. A real question of selfhood and which is which, given, in a sense, the perception, the phenomena that he was aware of was of force, it was of sitting. He knew that sitting was happening, but where Jung was in that is a bit more difficult. Obviously, in our mainstream, in our normal, in our default mode network sort of state of mind, we kind of say, well, of course, there's a man, and he's the German bloke, and he's sat on a rock. Psychedelics obviously help us to explore other ways of interpreting the same phenomena. I think psychedelics are inherently phenomenological, as in they bring us closer to the sensations, the things themselves. By the way, there's no slides here. It's just me. I'm just going to tell you. This is why I'm open to the questions. It's good to get into a dialogue. But I'm researching. I've done some research already, which I'll mention briefly here. We don't have much time, and then I'll talk about my current research, but it's all phenomenological qualitative research into the ayahuasca experience to understand, in a sense, what it looks like from the inside as well as from the outside. So my research is in conjunction with the Institute of Psychiatry here at King's College London. We have 2 UK teams researching ayahuasca. I'm loosely associated with one of them, I'm very grateful for, with Dr. Simon Ruffle and others there. And we're researching, and the other team is Carter Harris, Imperial, which was mentioned in the previous presentation. And we're looking at, what I'm looking at is to understand, in a sense, the subjective experience, but really the experience of ayahuasca, what it's like, and how that becomes healing, really. What about, many of us here looking at psychedelics may be against the kind of recreational, I would defend recreational use of drugs personally, if it's consensual and safe, etc. But there's some aspects of a healing aspect or journey to psychedelics, and how ayahuasca is involved in that, how people make sense of their experience and describe them as therapeutic. Again, we heard some of that in the presentation that's just gone. I'm sure you'll hear more of it later. I'm aware it's early for you guys. It's 20 to 4 in the afternoon here, but it's you're just getting started over there, and I wish you all the best with the conference and the rest of the presentations. So the themes, I'll cover the themes that I've discovered so far, just briefly from my existing research. Like I say, no slides, I'll just describe them to you. My participants, so I studied 6 participants and of those there were interviews with 4 in particular. So, N, if you think about N, it's quite small, but phenomenology and IPA, interpretative phenomenological analysis, which I'm studying under Jonathan Smith, who came up with this process of doing research, is about using very small samples and compared to quantitative research, and then going into great detail and really understanding not just what people say, but what people mean and what they think they mean and what I might think they mean in a sort of iterative process. It all has to be evidenced. It's very meticulous. And it's slow. You type the transcript and then you read it line by line and word by word over many hours, typically 40 or 50 hours analyzing 1 hour of data to uncover what's there. It was interesting, that mention of dark matter. For me, that's quite a good analogy, because it's looking at what you do know and about what you don't know. It's how do we evidence something? How is it showing itself, even if it's showing itself in being hidden? So how is it hidden? In phenomenology, we talk about hermeneutics of suspicion and empathy. We talk about empathy as kind of going with, as a psychotherapist, you're often doing that. You're kind of trying to understand it from the person's own point of view, but you're not the person. I'm the guy sat opposite. So I have a point of view and I can tell them things about their experience, particularly about their experience experience with me, which may not be obvious. So alternating these and playing with the hermeneutics of suspicion and empathy are important. And that's about kind of getting inside the experience, both in what it shows and what it hides, but in this is Heideggerian, how it shows what it hides in how it hides it. And that's quite, I think, useful to that dark matter analogy. The 5 themes I found were one called Our Telephone Line Back to Source, which is a line from one of my participants about insights and changes. One of them spoke about a lifelong addiction to recreational drugs, which they managed to move on from. So ayahuasca as a drug being used to crack a drugs addiction through perhaps challenge mechanisms, difficult to talk about, but through challenging an idea of self, through allowing, you saw that chart and you'll have seen it again in the previous, you'll have seen it in Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind. It's inside the front cover, from the study of psilocybin, of the connections between different areas of the brain that under psychedelics, it seems, again, I've been reading the neuroscience today, that the brain leaps, it makes bigger connections across more areas. So the back starts talking to the front, and the front starts talking to the back, and the parietal starts talking to the occipital. Occipital at the back deals with vision, and balance in the cerebellum here, and integration of sense input and integration of a self are all affected. So that first theme may relate to these things: Our Telephone Line Back to Source, insights and changes. The second theme is I ended up in my father's psyche. So that's about perspective. It's about inhabiting the father's view of his childhood, and then that helped that participant to make sense of things that had happened to her in her childhood, sort of some insight into intergenerational trauma, that you might call that. And so clearly, this isn't just billiard balls of chemicals bashing around the skull, right? This is, that is what's happening on one level of explanation, and it's a worthwhile level of explanation. But on the subjective, on the interpretive, on the meaning level, this is my main point rather than the finding. It's how we look at that. I'm trying to sell it to you a little bit. I'm trying to suggest how we might have another way of looking into the research and understanding the experience of ayahuasca and how it helps, if it helps. And so she found that understanding her father's upbringing better helped her to understand her upbringing and then herself better. The third theme was watch loads of ballet, different routes of healing. That participant wanted to talk about, and it related to a theme across all my participants, about the integration of cognitive behavioral therapy, meditative states, sweat lodges, ballet, theatre, catharsis, lots of different ways to, in a sense, access a somewhat similar state, that you might talk about that in terms of brain waves. Is there a decrease in alpha waves? Is there an increase in gamma waves? So they're the fast attentional brain waves. You've got neurons, you've got brain waves, and the chemicals affect the rhythm. They sort of disrupt the rhythm of the brain, the dominance of one brain wave over another over the course of an ayahuasca journey that might last it particularly seems to peak between 40 and 80 minutes, and then it carries on for 4 to 6 hours. But typically ayahuasca, I've not introduced ayahuasca, by the way. I'm assuming you all know it as an Amazonian plant medicine that's traditional to indigenous parts of the Amazon. I won't go into that because I feel like I'd be wasting your time. Feel free to ask more about that if you need to. But this drink that you take, this murky brown stuff, that it has that effect of there's chemicals in it. There's tetrahydroharmine, there's harmine, there's harmaline, and of course what most people talk about is dimethyltryptamine, DMT, but that's, in a sense, it's only one aspect of it, and I'm hesitant to kind of reduce it down to one chemical acting on the serotonin receptors. I think it's a lot more complicated than that, and neuroscience would agree, and biology would agree, and analysis of ayahuasca samples would agree, but also obviously the indigenous explanations of ayahuasca, which are really important to cultivate and curate and share, about demons, spirits, energies moving in and out and through people, and different plateaus of reality. That's kind of, again, both are happening at the same time. One thing, it's kind of a sort of mechanical worldview versus a meaningful worldview, to put it one way. And I'm researching the second half with some respect to the first half. Gets you off your head is my fourth theme. That's the idea of whether ayahuasca is a drug. I've already mentioned it. Is it a drug? Is it a plant medicine? Is it a sacrament? Obviously, there are ayahuasca religions worldwide. There's particularly in Brazil, the UDV and Barquina and the Santo Daime, of course. So at least, and then there's various ones in the USA as well, which you probably know more about than I do. And whereas in the UK, it's a somewhat grey area, but there's been 2 legal cases here in the UK for ayahuasca, and yeah, it's a bit unclear, but those didn't go well, put it that way, for the people who were accused, and there was jail involved, etc. As you find worldwide, a kind of century of this stuff. And the 5th theme was 3 Guys with Feathers, which is about intercultural exchange. So I've only got perhaps 5 minutes left, so I won't go into those themes in more detail. As I say, I don't think it's the point really for today. What I'm trying to uncover is that the many different ways of knowing, different epistemologies, that science often doesn't articulate its own philosophy, its own epistemology, its way of knowing what it knows, how it thinks it knows it, and its view of reality, which tends to be positivistic, materialistic. I'm using really long words. I apologize if those are a bit high, but I'm using them because they're technical, and they describe something really important, that it can be a bit, it can fail to acknowledge its own limitations in some way. And what I'm trying to do is research ayahuasca scientifically, by which I mean in a systematic and meticulous and careful, unbiased way that uncovers not an objective truth, because I'm a subject and it's me doing it, but in a much more nuanced and accurate way. I'm for accuracy and nuance and subtlety and understanding these experiences in their full form without taking anything out, kind of an anti-reductionist approach. And that's leads me to my current research. I'm planning to interview more participants, probably at the Ayahuasca Foundation in Peru. This is, I'm in the 1st year now of my PhD. I'm very humbled to be pursuing a PhD in ayahuasca. I know that many have at the California Institute of Integral Studies, for instance, and beyond. The UK is a bit sort of behind in a way, and ahead in other areas, I suppose. But what it can bring, I think, very aware of this Atlantic connection. What I think it could bring, possibly, is this particular view of a European phenomenology of Husserlian, Heideggerian, inspired by Sartre and Kierkegaard. This Western, and the European philosophical view, continental philosophy rather than analytical philosophy. I think it's just, I'm not saying it's better, I'm just than the other things and what you have in the States. And obviously there are people in the States that are experts on these things as well. But as a tradition, and as someone who comes from that tradition, I just want to bring that to the party, really, as another thing. I'm not trying to get rid of anybody else. As I say, I want to be invitational, I want to be inclusive. But I think that, and it's what I'm trying to do, is bring more of that. I think it has a lot to offer. I think it's quite unique, this approach of phenomenology and of into understanding people's experiences whilst they're on ayahuasca, and then afterwards, how do they make sense of that experience, and what happens, and how do they explain it, and what is the, in a sense, mechanism, I'm a psychotherapist, I work as a psychotherapist, and so it's these conversations with people which are just consensual, in a sense, ordinary conversations, where I'm trying to work out, and I'm not trying to work out, I'm trying to help them to work out what's going on for them and understand it better, not necessarily change it if they don't want to change it, but at least understand it better. And I suppose in that there is a change involved. I suppose I'm for these ordinary conversations. I am a bit suspicious of the medicalization of ayahuasca. I think that the religions, for instance, in Brazil have proven that it can be used safely in a community based, where the community takes care of the bad actors or the faux shamans and some of the safeguarding concerns, which otherwise we tend to kind of try and delegate that to a higher authority, like a psychiatrist or a doctor or something. And I'm not sure that's necessary, although I think both routes seem to me legitimate. You can pursue the medicalization of ayahuasca as one route to legalization. But I think there are other routes as well, and a kind of more self-regulated, like psychotherapy in the UK is peer-regulated rather than state-regulated. That may surprise some of you, I suppose, but it's true, and it works for the most part to a great extent. And I think that model could apply to psychedelics. So really, I guess that's I'll start wrapping up for me. I've rattled through quite a lot of stuff. Very interested in any questions you might have from my perspective or critique. I've just got a minute left here, I think. Just to kind of give the takeaway really, which is that experience matters as well as the atoms and the chemicals matters. The science of experience matters, which is phenomenology, and that's what I'm researching in a novel way to contribute to the growing field which we're all in.
Adam, thank you so much. Really appreciated the talk. I mean, what I'd love to actually start with is actually your own questions. I'd love to hear what are some of your favorite questions to ask the participants, you know, and kind of how do they inform the research, but what are those questions?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you know, the questions I ask tend to be what questions. So they're not why questions for a start, and they tend to try to be as open as possible. So it's the main question that I ask in the interviews is, so you've taken ayahuasca. What can you tell me about that? You know, it's really, compared to what a lot of research does, which is psychometric tests, you know, the hallucinogen rating scale, the well-being scales, the depression inventory, you know, it's rate how happy you were last week on a scale of 0 to 6, right? Which implies all sorts of concepts of depression or anxiety, or is your 6 the same as my 6? I don't know. Whereas what I try and do is it's always in their own terms. So they create the entire frame of understanding. It's completely theirs that I'm trying to understand rather than, so it's bottom up in a sense rather than top down. And all of my questions are aligned with that. So they're open and try not to kind of tread on or introduce or lead the witness in a way.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that the questions you ask at the interviews you do, they in some way impact your own psychedelic experiences when you step into them?
Oh, absolutely. It's very much, I mean, we talk about, as a psychotherapist, we think of ourselves as, I think of myself as a wounded healer. Absolutely. And a shaman once said to me, you know, the path of healing is the same as the path of being healed. The path of being healed is the same of becoming a healer. So for me, the wounded healer, the wounded researcher, I'm not trying to be some kind of big expert guy that knows everything. I go in with absolute humility as much as I can muster. You know, I like the idea that you need just enough ego to cross the road without being hit by a bus. That's about the level I try and maintain, and the rest is just a sort of openness. So I am affected by the interviews, absolutely, and that's part of it.
Mm-hmm, definitely. What are some of the things that you feel like have really been the largest insights you've gained from gathering this type of qualitative research? Can you think of a few moments that you were like, whoa, like this really changes our conception of how ayahuasca affects an individual human?
The kind of eureka moments for me are, personally and professionally, are where the whole idea, the whole stack of cards kind of is knocked over a bit. So your whole frame of reference changes. It's not just within your frame of reference. It's like, well, I know who I am, and okay, I can tweak it a bit. But where the whole charade is knocked down, at least temporarily, and then built up again, which the neuroscience supports this idea of self and not self, and fluidity to it. So for instance, during one of my experiences, when I experienced being a jaguar, you know, I thought I was a baby jaguar for a while, crawling along around the Maloka. You know, that's it really, when you see the world with the brain of a jaguar, or you think you are, a bit like Wittgenstein talked about, you know, seeing the world as a bat might perceive it. I'd never even thought what that might be like. I never even tried to imagine it, and it changed when I'm back in my Adam suit and, you know, pretending to be normal. I can still connect to that and see the world in a different way. So there's sort of profound empathy, which I got from that, and I think my participants echo that in many ways.
Definitely. What are some of the biggest differences you see between different demographics who consume ayahuasca when you ask your questions and the responses that they give?
Honestly, I don't have the numbers to say. I
Mhm.
sort of barely think in terms of demographics for that reason. Actually, IPA tends to try and get a homogenous sample. I mean, it's
Mhm.
homogenous into so that you're sort of reducing the number of factors, so that you can just focus on one thing, which is they've all taken ayahuasca. That's the only thing that's different about them versus the control group, in a sense, being the rest
Mm.
of everybody. So with 4 participants, it's a bit silly to talk about demographics, and we generally don't. I think it could be useful, but I think older people will have different experiences to younger people. That came up,
Mm.
different, particularly ayahuasca is a group experience, so sort of versus younger, tend to, yeah, I think, if you're an older person, it can be it can feel like a younger person's game or exercise in many ways. So I don't know about that. Age is probably the main one. Gender is obviously a big one. Santo Daime and other religions will separate men and women in various ways. And couples might be split up during ceremony. Sexuality, should there be gay men's ayahuasca circles? Too many questions, so many questions.
Mhm. And what about the amount of experiences that individual has had? Do the studies, say, okay, well, you've had ayahuasca, but this individual has had 100 experiences. This person has only had one.
I think that's a really interesting question. The only answer is more research needed, but I was talking to my colleague, Dr. Simon Ruffle, about this recently, and he was talking to Professor David Nutt on a podcast, and they're talking about the fact that really, I've always sort of thought that it's the first one that counts.
Hmm.
It's the first one that changes your basic epistemology, your basic ontology, and they were sort of agreeing with that a little bit, that whether you have 500 experiences, or I think there's a bigger difference between 0 and 1 than there is between 1 and 500. That's a guess. I can't prove that with evidence, but I could point at a few things that tell me that aren't just my opinion.
Hmm. Definitely. Well, beautiful, Adam. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate the time, man.
Pleasure.
Say hi to Simon for me.
I certainly will.
Yeah, be
Thanks,
well.
guys. All the
Bye
best.
bye.
Bye.